Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Jordan, and I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Legislative Affairs and Advocacy at Hospice of the Chesapeake. Welcome to our new podcast series, Reimagining Hope, a podcast series presented by Hospice of the Chesapeake and Chesapeake Supportive Care. I love my role at Hospice of the Chesapeake, but most importantly, I'm a daughter, a mom, a nurse practitioner, a caregiver, an Army veteran, and a community advocate. In addition to my role at Hospice, I serve on the Maryland Board of Nursing, and I care for patients at the University of Maryland Capital Region Medical Center on a part-time basis. I have a passion for raising awareness about care available to those living with serious illness, and that's what I hope to share with you today. I see patients and their families struggling every day to figure out what resources and services are available to them and who they need to care for themselves or a loved one. At Hospice of the Chesapeake, we recognize navigating this life event can be overwhelming and exhausting for everyone, but you want to do your best. Our goal today is to provide you with quick, easily understandable information, but also to give you critical skills and real-time tools you can use today to navigate this part of your life. My job is to bring guests to the table who can provide valuable insight and help you reimagine the hope you may be missing. We are living with serious illness longer today than ever before in our history. And whether you're at diagnosis, months into curative treatment, or nearing the end of life, you each have your own unique experience. We hope these talks bring you some comfort, skill, and peace. Welcome to our podcast. Today we're discussing a challenging topic, grief during the holidays. And we know this can be very difficult for caregivers and family members who have lost a loved one. So joining us is the lovely Jennifer Ward. She's a grief counselor at Hospice of the Chesapeake with extensive experience helping people through difficult times. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Thank you. And tell me a little bit more about yourself, or tell our listeners, and then we'll jump right into it.
Sure. So I am a licensed master social worker, and I am a certified grief professional, so I specialize in helping people through grief and loss. Currently, I'm a grief counselor with the Hospice of the Chesapeake, and my job is really to walk people through their grief journey, any losses. I run support groups on loss of partner, loss of parent, loss of son-in-law, so that's what I do. And I'm really passionate about working with people through their grief journey.
Absolutely, and it's so important.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've said time and time again is that everybody's experience is different.
Sure.
Everybody's journey with chronic illness, loss of life, and grief, it's all different.
Sure.
There's no one way to support someone who's going through this.
Sure.
And so when we talk about grief during the holidays, it may hit different for different people, especially if culturally, holidays were like a staple.
Yeah.
Or did they lose their loved one during the holiday? Sure. I thought that this was a befitting topic, so I'm so thankful to have you here. But to start, can you explain how grief manifests during the holiday season?
Sure. So first, with grief, it's a natural reaction to anything that you've lost, but especially around the holidays where families are traditionally getting together, celebrating. The weather may be looking differently depending on where you are. And so oftentimes you're without your loved one. So oftentimes where you have to celebrate things like Thanksgiving, when you have to celebrate things like Christmas, New Year's. And so when you're without your loved one, it really manifests in a way because you start to yearn and long for the person that's no longer with us. And so it can manifest in like not being able to do traditions, not being able to connect with people, and it can also manifest in ways where you're trying to figure out your new normal around the holidays. And so grief can particularly come up right around these special dates. There are also like special dates around the holidays that people have, and so they really just come up.
Understandable. And what are some common reactions or feelings people might experience during the holidays when they're grieving?
Oftentimes, you'll see things like anger. You'll see things like sadness. You may see people being isolated or saying that they're lonely. You might often hear of a thing called forgetfulness. People don't forget dates. They forget holidays. They forget doing things. Then it's also sadness. Sadness is a really big one in terms of grief. People are often really sad. They're feeling despair. They're feeling like there's no point or no direction, especially around the holidays, because in the past, holidays meant everything for them and their loved one, and now they don't have any of that to hone in on, to celebrate, and to honor. So that's a lot of the feelings that we see when people are grieving around the holidays.
Got it. And what coping strategies do you recommend for those who are grieving during the holidays?
One, I would just say be able to feel your feelings. That's the first coping thing, to accept where you are in terms of your grief, and sit with that, being able to sit with your feelings. But then also things like remembering your person. So right around the holidays, it's a good time to do things like make a memory box or go to their favorite place. I know people, for Thanksgiving in particular, a lot of people like to go to certain restaurants or cook certain foods, so they might do something like that. I also say grief does not have to be dark, so lighting a candle to honor the person, to memorialize the person, things where you can just really remember your person. And then I also like to say mindfulness, like doing things like meditation. That's a good way to cope with your feelings, your grief, and to really get in touch with the pain that you might be experiencing around the holidays, or the loneliness that you might be experiencing around the holidays. That's some things that people do to cope when they're going through grief, going through loss, mourning the bereaved person in their life.
Yeah, you mentioned something very interesting, was like that tradition of remembrance. So like, I lost my dad in 2000. And so I was a kid, but I know what my dad's favorite meal is. So for Father's Day, I make that favorite meal. My kids are like, I only get this meal once a year, and it's so good. I'm like, you're only going to get it once a year. But, that's so important. That's like a ritual to me. It makes me feel better. It makes me feel more connected. Because my dad died when I was a child, and now I can make this meal as an adult. So, just those little things where I recognize where I am, I settle into it, I sit with it, and then I've come up with a tradition that makes me feel better and more connected to my loved one.
Sure, absolutely.
How can someone navigate social gatherings if they're struggling with grief?
That's a good one. One, I would say give yourself some grace, give yourself some compassion. One thing we say as counselors is to make sure that you have a good support system. So there are social events that you may want to, if it's going to be overwhelming and you know that, or you're going to have triggers, that might not be the event to go to. Maybe you can just say, I don't want to participate in that. Or I also say, bring a friend. So have your friends or your support systems to go with you if you have to go to a social gathering. I also say things like navigating, so also creating your own new normal. So for instance, if the gathering is, or the social event is at someone's house, maybe invite people over to your house, or go to someone's house where you feel safe or it's not far away from where you are, so that you can feel like you have a sense of what might be going on. A part of knowing what's going on is knowing your triggers. So for instance, if it's a loved one that was like a parent, maybe being around a lot of family members might not be that might be your trigger. So you'll start to recognize, okay, well, maybe I don't want to be around a lot of family, or I don't want to be around a lot of kids if my loss was a child or something like that. So recognizing your triggers, being able to hone into your support system. So whether it's your friends or your children or your partner, whatever it might be, making sure that you have your tribe of grief folks. And they don't have to necessarily be professional folks, but when you're navigating the holidays or social situations, but definitely having people that you can say, this is what's going on. I may not want to go to this. It's going to cost me too much anguish or issues. Or if you do decide that you want to go to the event, then you can say, okay, you know what? I need you to support me. But then lastly, I would also say, if you get to an event or a social gathering and it's going to be too much, you might need to take a step away from the event. You might need to walk around, or you might just give yourself 30 minutes, 15 minutes to enjoy the occasion, and then know that when this 15 minutes or 30 minutes is over, that you've done your mission in a sense, and then you can go home or reward yourself by pouring back into yourself, or just knowing that you can only take so much of social interaction or gathering, and really just being able to look into yourself and know what you can do in terms of your grief.
Yeah. Sometimes, I've heard family members or previous patients say sometimes they feel guilty, going out to these events, especially when they're much closer to the date of loss.
Sure, yeah.
Right. And so everything that you just said, having your tribe, your support, recognizing your limits, they're so important. Yes. And a lot of times you'll have individuals who'll say, you know what, you just got to get out. But that may not be the solution. Right. Understanding your triggers is very important.
Absolutely.
But when should someone consider seeking professional help during this time?
So usually when your grief is causing anguish to a point that you're not getting daily things done, where you're not able to practice self-care, where you're not taking care of yourself, then I would say that's when you need to get a professional involved. Because one thing that's for certain, you are not able to do grief alone. Grief is not something that you can do by yourself. And so typically when we see someone coming in, they're irritable, they're not getting along with their family members, they're really isolated, or they just might blow up. And so if it's really impacting where you are, or you're not able to feel your feelings or really engage with people outside of your loss, that's definitely an indication that you need to come in and speak to a counselor, therapist, clinician to support you in your grief journey.
So, so important, because sometimes it's very difficult to recognize grief when you're going through it.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it may be that friend or a coworker or like a supervisor or a manager that says, you really haven't been yourself lately. You've missed some deadlines. You've been late to work. You haven't showed up to your kid's game, something like that. Just to show that something is impacting you from being your usual self. So it's so important that you touched on that topic of when to reach out.
Sure.
So is there anything that you want to add? This has been really helpful for our listeners to understand how to navigate grief and loss, especially during the holiday. But do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
Sure. I would say that, again, you cannot do grief alone. So if you just want to talk to somebody, I think it's good just to know who your people are. So, sometimes you have family members that are your people, your tribe, or your community. So you have to really know who's going to be there to support you. But then also there are organizations and support groups that are available to you. So I want to make sure that people know that there are people who are also grieving. There are online communities. There are places you can go into to get support. Grief is not something that you can do alone. And when we say grief, I want to make sure people understand that grief could be any type of loss. It doesn't necessarily have to be a death of a loved one. It could be a change of your situation. It could be a health condition. It could be moving somewhere. It could be changing your relationship status. I want to make sure people know that anytime that you feel like you need support or you're not getting over something, and grief is also individual, so there's no right or wrong way to grieve. But it's important to make sure that you have the supports, the people who can walk you through your journey, support you. At the same time, you're going to have people who don't get what you're going through in terms of your grief. They may want you to get over it. They may not understand it. Or we live in a society that's very death avoidant. So make sure that you cannot, that you can't do grief alone, but more importantly, that you have your support systems. Hospice of the Chesapeake has some wonderful groups and counselors through the Chesapeake Life Center. So that's an option that's also available to people in the community. So I want to just share that.
Absolutely. Well, for our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And Jennifer, thank you so much for coming with all of this insightful information. We encourage you to visit our website at hospicechesapeake.org to learn more about our Chesapeake Life Center and our other resources that you can employ to support you while you're grieving during the holidays. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.